Okay, if you guys don't have the Active Self-Protection app yet, you should download it because one of Tim Herron's full classes is on there. And there's so much information. I think I got to like episode 6 and there might be like 20 some episodes of Tim Herron on there. But just in those 6 episodes, I took like 3 pages of notes. And, and so one of the things you talked about, so we're tying the driving in with the shooting was, could you explain or talk about how you were saying how you explain vision to somebody with the car analogy? Do you remember? Like looking at the hood versus looking at the
Right,
horizon? Will
right.
you do that? Was
So
brilliant how you said that.
yeah, a lot. I mean, and that's a big one, is a big takeaway. And we see this in a lot of sports. It doesn't just relate to driving, but that's where kind of my background comes from, and it's something that is relatable to every single person. I tell people in class all the time, like, "Hey, how'd you get here today? Did you take a bus? You take a cab, or did you drive?" And everybody's like, "Oh, we drove." Great. So stick with me here. Let's talk about something. And so when you think about like driving on the highway, or think about like speeding up your vision to, to a level of speed at which you want to attain, even in your shooting. You got to think about like I ask students all the time, like, do you remember the first time when you were a brand new driver and you got on the interstate? And,
Mhm.
most people are like, oh yeah, I can remember that. I'm like, do you remember how petrified it was? To like you're doing 50 miles an hour and everybody's zipping by you at 70 and 80, and you're like, slow down, you maniac. You're thinking to
Mhm.
yourself, like, I'm gonna die. And a lot of it, we don't realize how much farther ahead we actually need to prepare for things. We tend to drive when we initially get behind the wheel, and we're taught very, very early, to drive at 15 or 16 years of age, to be very defensive. And being a very defensive driver is important, but in order to be a good defensive driver, we have to learn how to drive proactively to every aspect, right? We're
Right.
making plans, we're thinking ahead, we're looking far enough
Mhm.
ahead so that we're not just driving reactively to things. And shooting is the same
Mhm.
way. We never want to
Mhm.
really shoot reactively. We want to shoot proactively. I want to have a plan in place and know exactly where I want to get my eyes first so that I can steer the gun to the direction of where my eyes lead it. So we kind of get back to that analogy in driving. Like when you're on the highway and the first time you get on the highway and you're doing 50, a lot of it is because we're looking right off the dash. We're looking, right at the speedometer, then we're looking just off the hood of the car, and everything is zipping past us so fast. We're making all of these little corrections with the steering wheel because we are driving in a reactive state. So like think about like when you do that and you're driving down the highway, think of how many times that you make corrections to the steering wheel just to keep the car in the lane. And then
Mhm.
think about like as you start to look further ahead and further ahead and further ahead, and you acclimate your vision to getting far enough ahead of the car, of the vehicle, that you've got such a control over it visually. Like you fed your brain so much information that everything seems to slow down, right?
Right.
So then that's where when you start to look 6, 7, 8 car lengths ahead, or like as a driving instructor, we tell you like look out as far ahead as you possibly can. Look out to the horizon. And when you start to look that far ahead, then everything slows down. You're driving, you're kind of just driving in the moment, right? And then everything just becomes a process. Shooting is exactly the same way. So, I tell people like as you start to look further ahead, 50 miles an hour becomes 60, 60 becomes 80, 80 becomes 90. Oh, and now we're getting a ticket, right? And a lot of times when you get pulled over, of course, the police officer says, "Do you understand or know how fast you are going?" And a lot of us we go, "No, I had no idea." That's because we weren't paying attention to the now. We were paying attention to the future and like, ensuring that we were being as proactive as possible. Like I said,
Well
shooting is identically the same way.
well, also, we're developing a comfort level at a certain speed, and I think you maybe touched on that too because
Mhm.
as you develop subconscious competence, you also develop a comfort level of what speed feels fast to you or not, right? And so then if you
100%.
keep stretching that, then your fast can expand, right?
Exactly. And that's why setting small goals are great in your shooting, right? For from the training aspects. But at the same time, knowing that those goals constantly need to be adjusted or lifted or we
Mhm.
grow stagnant. So I mean, we take for instance, Most everybody, especially I recognize a lot of the names in the comments here are, you know, a lot of defensive minded shooters. And so a lot of the things that these folks are working on are things that I see in like the Ask Dry Fire Facebook group and things like that, where everybody's working on like draw to first shot. So if we take draw to first shot into account, everybody wants to have a really brisk, you know, let's say draw the first shot to a 7-yard target in say a second. But then as soon as they achieve that, what's your next goal? Right?
Mhm.
And for a lot of people, they've never even thought about what comes next. You know, that
Mhm.
so a lot of times we grow stagnant. We hit one plateau or we hit one goal, and that becomes then it's like we have achieved that goal, but we didn't have another goal to drive to next. So we end up on this even ground where we have a plateau and we don't know what to do. So, you know, and
Mhm.
a lot of shooters or a lot of students then immediately that's when they start to seek out instruction. They seek out guidance,
Mhm.
which is great. Um, for others, you know, that maybe they join a Facebook group or they join, you know, they join a club or they seek out competition or things like that. For others, yet they may think that 1 second draw, that's what I wanted, that's the pinnacle. But then after a couple of months, they just grow stagnant. And a lot of times that stagnation turns into boredom. And when they're bored, then they
Mhm.
no longer want to dry fire. They no longer want to improve their skill set.